Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Rock Enroll, the enrollment marketing podcast created by Vision Point Marketing. I'm Katy Campbell, the Chief Client Officer here at Vision Point, and I'm so excited to be joined by a long-term colleague of mine and partner of mine, Brandi Stocker. Brandi, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Katy.
Yeah, would love to just hear, just to get us started. I love to ask a little bit about your relationship with higher ed. We've all chosen to work at a higher ed specific enrollment marketing agency, which usually means you're thinking about this industry 40 plus hours a week. So would love to just know about your, relationship and experience with higher education.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, yes, definitely think about and live in the world of higher ed, definitely more than 40 hours a week. Have worked in the industry now for over 20 years and kind of pertinent to this topic today, having to do with financial aid and the FAFSA changes. I actually had gotten my start in higher education within the financial aid office. I was a state work study student as an undergraduate and was thrown into the world of financial aid as a 19-year-old at the time. And that was a couple decades ago, back when you had to only fill out a FAFSA using a paper form. There was no completing it online. And so I started off my career processing paper FAFSAs and inputting all of the data from every FAFSA that was submitted to the Department of Education. And so that really, opened the world of financial aid for me in terms of just understanding what kinds of questions they ask on the FAFSA. Um, and understanding how student loans and award packages are created. And so, yeah, ended up spending 8 years in financial aid. My first 8 years in higher ed were in financial aid, where after I graduated, I was hired as a financial aid counselor, and then further from there I moved on to become a financial aid director for a few years as well. And so at that point, I wanted to kind of shift my focus in higher ed into more of the academic side, and was really interested also in pursuing my doctorate in higher education as well. So I wanted to go on the academic side. So I went to a university where I could do that, and then also maybe get my doctorate tuition paid for, because why not? It's a definite perk of working in the higher ed space. Yeah, and so I did that and was able to concurrently pursue my doctorate while learning about, goodness, medical education. I went and worked for the University of Kentucky College of Medicine, was exposed to the world of developing medical education curriculum, accreditation standards. And then I went on to from there, a 4-year institution to help develop their online learning programs. And so from there, it kind of opened the world into instructional design and, supporting with online student needs and increasing engagement, and working with undergrad and grad populations, and transitioning on campus programs to online programs, and all of the nuances that entails, throwing in marketing, CRM systems, making sure that you're leveraging the most out of those systems. So I had a big hand in working with, our CRM and communications and marketing to prospective students. Worked with providing faculty training for online faculty. And then, now that I've been able to, it's goodness, been over almost 10 years since I've had my doctorate. I now teach as well. So I've been teaching for 7 or 8 years at a couple different institutions in their master's and doctoral program, and serve on several dissertation committees. So I feel like there isn't really one area within higher ed that I don't feel like I've touched, or that I'm not familiar with. So it's been quite a career.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, how incredible to, whether it's for this topic specifically or just through all of these different lenses as a student, as a, st entry level career professional, as a doctoral student, as a, as very well as a senior director now, to see so many evolutions of this industry. And what we'll focus on today is the evolution of kind of the FAFSA program. And I did not know, and I love that you really are having almost this like full circle moment of knowing this form so intimately as it was your job to now seeing it, evolve over the years to this latest version this last year. But that's probably a great place for us to start. So for us today, we really want to dive into the evolution of the FAFSA form, especially in the last year, and the impact that that's had on our students in our institutions. For those joining, of course, you probably know, but FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. And I know all of our clients, I mean, it's May 10th as we're recording this today. So many of our campus partners, we can't even, talk about fall start or undergraduate enrollment without really bringing into light what's going on since the FAFSA Simplification Act. So, Brandi, do you mind helping us start there? Just even what changed, what was that act, and kind of what changes that brought about, maybe well-intentioned, but some challenges it hit along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there were quite a few changes to that came with the Simplification Act. But I'll just kind of highlight some of the big ones that I know are kind of top of mind for students and their families and college administrators. With the first really just being that the most important thing is it reduced the number of questions on the FAFSA form, which in turn, the intention here is that it would make it easier for students and their families to complete the FAFSA and not take as long to do so. I know before the Simplification Act, the FAFSA was a lengthy application. It asked a lot of complex financial questions that students and their family just didn't know how to answer. And I can say, having, worked in the higher ed space now for so long, I remember when it used to be even longer, and they've tried to simplify it as it has evolved over the last couple decades. But I would say this is probably the greatest push to simplifying it, and as it relates to providing just college accessibility to more students and being able to provide more federal funding, so need-based aid based on FAFSA data. So that's going to be one of the biggest pieces here with the Simplification Act, is just that they've taken out a ton of questions, and some of those have included questions that were really unnecessary and can have been confusing. So thinking about some of those complex questions around, the investments. So I remember working, as a financial aid counselor and then as a director, having students call me and ask me, about investments and assets. And well, I've inherited my grandmother's house. She passed away last year. Does that count? Do I need to report that? I've got, $1,200 in my bank account. Do I need to report that? So there are just all of these really complex questions that I feel like were so burdensome to students and their families in trying to figure out, how much do I report? And then, of course, like just the stress and the fear of, what if I report the wrong number? This is a federal application. Are they going to come get me? That was, I think, one of the biggest changes that I think is really going to impact students and families with this change here. And so there's several others, going from the EFC to the SAI number, student aid index. And so how they're calculating that is going to be different too. And how they approach it. It's, what they're saying is it's actually going to be beneficial for students, in that more FAFSA completers will actually be able to be eligible for more need-based aid. I think I had read somewhere it said around just over 600,000 new students will be eligible now for a federal Pell Grant. And an additional 1.5 million students will be eligible to receive the maximum Pell amount. And for those of you who may not be aware of what the Pell Grant maybe even is, it's a federal grant. It's money that's based on your FAFSA data that you don't have to pay back. So the most Pell Grant you can get possible, the better off you'll be to cover some of those costs of attendance fees.
Yeah. Brandi, it's so interesting to hear you talk about kind of the simplification of the form and what that intended benefit of all of these changes are. Because, of course, now as we're sitting here in May, the conversation around the Simplification Act has turned very much, I think probably since, feels like over the holidays, like over the winter holidays. So from like late December to now, to this being so much more of a headache or a thorn or a real challenge and hurdle for people. But from how you were describing the change from expected family contribution, EFC, to that student aid index or SAI, well intended, like intended to get people more access to FAFSA funds or support with higher education. Is that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this isn't the first time that the Department of Education has tried to, again, well-intentioned, try and make the process easier for students and their families. Thinking back to the time in 2010 when they made a shift to direct lending. That was well-intentioned so that the Department of Education was essentially then servicing all of the federal loans at that time. Again, well-intentioned, but poorly executed. This meant a lot of financial aid administrators couldn't certify loans because the new system meant to certify loans, you could try and enter in a loan and certify it for a student, and you would just watch the dial turn and turn and turn and then time out. And so it was just like a headache. They just weren't ready for those changes, even though they were well intended. So it brought me back to my financial aid days.
Like, oh,
Actually, I can
goodness.
only imagine what financial aid administrators are experiencing right now. Last year, I attended ACRO-SEM, and I believe it was in Seattle, and I attended a few financial aid sessions. And I mean, financial aid administrators there were almost in tears at just the fear of the unknown. They were stressed. You could see their legs twitching at just talking about the topic, because there was just so much unknown and nobody knew how this was going to affect students, how this is going to affect their families, enrollment, the systems and tools that they use every day. It was just, there's so many questions left unanswered. And we're starting to see that play out now.
Yeah. So that's probably a great place to go next. And this idea of almost, we've seen this film before feeling as to maybe a little PTSD coming back as to we've maybe
Yes.
seen how this could go. And I think that probably explains also, at ACRO-SIM or AMA, which are kind of late fall conferences last year in the higher ed space, so much anticipation for how it could go. What happened? How did we get from there to here? And I'm curious from your perspective, what you've been hearing or what you've been seeing with the institutions that we've partnered with. What happened?
Yeah, so going back to the fall semester, and just again, the fear of the unknown. Everybody had heard that the FAFSA was going to be released on the last day of the year, so December 31st, 2023. And that's when it opened. So after constant delays, it would finally open, and so students and their families were able to go on and complete a FAFSA, and or still they thought. I know that there were a large number of those trying to complete a FAFSA who had errored out. It wouldn't work, it wouldn't process, it wouldn't submit. It would tell them to come back another time, So the system was certainly bombarded and not ready. And I think what the Department of Ed was trying to do was like a soft launch. And what it really did was created a lot of chaos for students and their families who could not submit a FAFSA and thought, is this my computer? Am I doing something wrong? Did it take the information that I sent? Did it not? And so then this, as a result, like dominoed to financial aid administrators to field a lot of those questions. And because they were either calling the Department of Ed, or they were calling their loan servicer, or they're calling the financial aid office at the school they were intending to send the FAFSA results to. As time passed, though, the Department of Ed was really trying to work through a lot of the bugs in the system that was prohibiting a lot of students and their families from completing the FAFSA. And so over time, throughout the spring semester, we started to see more and more, FAFSAs coming through, and the processing times were beginning to come down. I think as of now, if you submit a FAFSA, you can expect your results to be sent to any of the institutions that you're sending them to in 1 to 3 business days. And so that's a win. But I will say, just as recent as just last month, the entire month of April, they were working heavily on trying to troubleshoot a widely known issue around just processing errors still, where students would submit their FAFSA, and it would be the results would be sent to the institutions, and then from there they had to reprocess it. And so a lot of that was handled in the month of April, and we're just 10 days into May, so we're still seeing pretty significant issues just as soon as recently as April. But as more time passes, it seems to some of these little issues and errors seem to be resolving themselves, but that's, not to say that there's not going to continually be, issues in the future, because now financial aid offices are struggling with, trying to catch up and package those financial aid award letters. We're well past decision day, and I had read an article recently that said more than 30% of schools haven't even started packaging award letters. And this is something that traditionally happens much, much earlier. And so lots of delays. And so students, families are, struggling to, decide without an award letter what institution they should intend to enroll at. So that leaves kind of a chaos at the institution level too, because they don't know how many students to expect to enroll either. So definitely has had some impact.
Yeah, it feels like I just kind of want to pull back on so much of that one by one, maybe starting with on the students and on their family. So to repeat back a little bit of what you just said, they are used to, students and families are used to and have typically received these decisions much earlier in the year. Would you say usually closer to like January, February, they would have this knowledge?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So if you're used to in February having a sense of what types of awards you would be getting, AKA how much you need to put up out of pocket to attend said university, then it made a lot of sense why May 1st used to be that typical decision day, signing day, because you now have all your options in front of you. You can make an informed decision as a student or as a family to what you all want to embark on for your higher education. Great. May 1st comes and we are selecting said university. This year, what that's looking like, though, is it is May 10th. I maybe know where I have been accepted or waitlisted or deferred or whatever that decision was, but I may not know the financial commitment that each of those institutions would require of me and my family. So because of that, how can I make a decision or a well-informed decision? Gosh, you just have to imagine not only the stress, but the chaos, or even just the internal battles as to, do you commit to get a spot? Do you hold back because you don't know? we constantly see market studies and data for our client partners that cost and affordability continue to be the number one consideration factor when making this decision. So how can we be expecting students to do that without this information? Curious if you've seen just even specific states that have been hit harder by this, or specific populations that have been hit harder by this. What have you kind of been seeing across your experience and research, Brandi, as to who's feeling this?
Yeah, so to your point of what decision do I make, just given that I'm not sure what my aid package is going to look like. I will say I've recently read an article that said students who are considering, and we know nowadays students often apply up to 6 different institutions on average, and so that's 6 different schools that you may not know. How much is it going to cost me? Right now, the students that are being really affected, first of all, are those who have applied and been admitted to 3 different colleges. Maybe they have their dream college, and maybe it costs a little bit more. And in prior years, they'd be able to decide, yes, this is where I want to go to school, even though it costs a little bit more, but I know that I'm going to get more aid. And so they've been able to then weigh their options financially and see what makes the most sense for them and their families. Right now, what students in this scenario are experiencing is just the unknown, and they're seeing more students enrolling at their cheapest option. So not necessarily their first option, but their cheapest option, just because of the financial impact. They don't want to commit to those schools that may cost a little bit more that they really wanted to go to. And then further, just today, reading that an article from Higher Ed Dive that said, in West Virginia, they're down 40% in the number of FAFSA applications submitted. That's significant. That's almost 1 out of 2, especially in a rural state like West Virginia, where they're really trying to push higher education. And what kind of impact is that going to have on low income students and those graduating from high school who maybe in the past have submitted a FAFSA and have been able to get that award letter from an institution and at least start engaging in a conversation with an institution. Well, now they're not even submitting a FAFSA, almost 1 out of 2. So, we're thinking about just the impact there with just, again, going back to college accessibility and, if having somebody from said institution reach out to them. And right now, if those conversations aren't happening, who's supporting their personal and academic goals? I'm not sure who is. And so it's definitely having a domino effect.
Yeah. And I mean, also knowing, reading more and more about something I don't think I realized because it wasn't a requirement when I was going through that experience, but 8 states currently having a required FAFSA completion as part of your high school prereq, as we were chatting about earlier. And several of those states looking to implement a 1-year, lift of that requirement because, you're coming up on their graduation dates. And so now not only are you creating, it's this, not you, but now not only is there this creation of uncertainty for what to do next, but also right now, will I even be able to graduate high school that I've been working at for several years, all due to like a technical issue? I can't get the form to go through. I can't figure out the piece to complete. So lots of empathy for what these families and students must be feeling. When turning our lens then to the institution side, I know you mentioned meeting with financial aid counselors and coming across several people that work right in the heart of this late last year. What is the impact of this on all of them? Has it, is it their workload essentially just in a constant state of flux right now? I would have to think the idea of enrollment models or yield models for fall 24 are just have a question mark next to them for several institutions. What have you been hearing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, financial aid is already a department on campus that isn't traditionally one that a lot of that is almost like a segue um, office where, and by that I mean when you work in higher education, sometimes you can start your career off in admissions and then you move on to maybe work with the transfer office or maybe move on to academic advising. Um, Financial aid isn't necessarily a segue where a lot of people go and work in financial aid because it's one of those offices where it's governed by federal regulations. There's annual audits and there's a policy book, I want to say 8 inches thick. It was printed off. I've seen it printed once. And so you think about, the staff and the fact that not a lot of professionals move on to go and work in a financial aid office because of the stress and the fear that's associated with it and not wanting to give out the wrong information. Usually when you get questions in admissions about financial aid, it's, oh, go talk to financial aid because I don't want to give you the wrong information. So
Yeah.
thinking about that just almost as like a premise is they're already often understaffed. There's not, there's not a huge pool of financial aid candidates to pull from to hire and bring in new staff to meet the need and demand right now that these changes are forcing upon financial aid offices and the staff. So they're already understaffed typically, and now with budget cuts, they're not experiencing the levels of professional development that they've been able to enjoy in the past that has been necessary given all of the governing rules and regulations imposed. So you've got less people with less professional development in their back pocket, and you have an influx now of more students and families calling, asking for answers. And oftentimes they don't have all of the answers, where they've often been in the state of, well, we're waiting for, clarification. We're waiting on with these delays just the same way that you are. So they've been really struggling, I have no doubt, and trying to address the influx of phone calls and foot traffic in their office as well. But then also thinking about it from a technical perspective, you've got these systems that the financial aid data or FAFSA data comes in from the Department of Ed. So you think about data mapping, right? And so not knowing what questions were even going to be kept on the FAFSA, maybe new questions. There was still a lot of ambiguity around, well, how is this data going to come from the Department of Ed and fit nicely into the system the way that it has in the past? So we would know, question 21, maybe about AGI income might, if I think that was field 21, I could be wrong, but we would know how that would come into our system. But now we don't know what questions are going to be asked and how are these going to be mapped into our system? How are we going to receive the data? And then from there, how does that fit into our financial aid modeling approach? And so there's just so many questions and so much unknown. And when you're dealing with the technical issues and then the lack of staffing that's necessary and needed for just, again, the influx, it's been a challenging, I would say, a year and a half to 2 years, just because they knew that this was coming and didn't know how they can best prepare for it. I know some schools have moved staff from other offices and tried to train them to come and work in the financial aid short term, which is now turned into more long term. They're being asked to work evening hours, weekends. And then those offices where those staff are coming from now are are lacking staff capacity too. And so it's just, again, a domino effect that hasn't been good for financial aid administrators, and just that direct impact that this has caused on them. It doesn't help with staff retention either. After all of this time and these issues, we're seeing even more staff even outside of financial aid, leaving higher education. And, the stressors don't help that cause.
Yeah. So then when we want to bring those two worlds together a little bit, so from institution then to students and families, you know, our world is so much centered around how institutions communicate to prospective students, current students, typically when driving towards an enrollment outcome, which financial aid is absolutely a big piece of that decision and of that conversation. So curious to, your thoughts, Brandi, at seeing this, from so many different lenses and experiencing it directly. In what ways can colleges and universities almost, enhance their transparency or their support for students when navigating the FAFSA process, given all the uncertainties caused by the delays? How can colleges be communicating with students during this time to hopefully help them in this time in this process?
Yeah, and that's kind of been the biggest question, and where we've really supported our client institutions over the last year and longer has been thinking about communication strategy when there's so much unknown. I think that the key thing that we've learned and that we've communicated to our partners has been don't make any promises. We all know that delay after delay after delay can come. So don't be making any promises around dates and when you expect to have award letters and when you'll receive FAFSA data and what that turnaround will look like. Because, I read on the NASFA, the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, on their page, that it seems like throughout this process, they feel like they take 2 steps forward and then they come back a step. So as soon as they think that they're advancing and that they're starting to see these issues in the past, new issues present themselves. So that's certainly been one thing we've been saying is don't make any promises in your communications, but it is absolutely important to not ghost students. You don't want to, nobody wants to be ghosted. So,
No.
there's so much unknown and question. Don't leave your students waiting to hear when the next change is going to happen, because you may not hear anything for a month. Our recommendation has always been to keep up with financial aid related communications, at least on a weekly basis. And if you don't have any new updates, that's okay. You can say what we've encouraged schools to do is blatantly state what you do know and what you don't know, and just let them know where really that's great information sharing, and keeping students up to date on what you're aware of in terms of financial aid processing and what's been communicated with you from the Department of Ed. So I think that that's important, and it really helps to establish that communication cadence that shows that you're obviously not ghosting them, that you're continually giving them information, even if you don't have necessarily any new information. And I think it helps to facilitate a conversation or discussion, perhaps among just students and families to make sure that everybody's aware of what updates are occurring out in the higher ed space around the FAFSA changes. I think it helps build trust too. If they continually hear from you and see that you're sharing new information that you have available, it helps develop trust and confidence. Feels like they've got somebody in their back corner, because at this point in time when financial circumstances are just a top reason of whether you're going to attend a school or not, you want to make sure that you have that person, that go-to person that you can trust, that you have an established relationship with. I think you should do that through emails and texts. Find different ways and channels to be able to communicate that. But I also think it's important to post that information on your website, and as continual changes happen and occur, making sure that you're updating that information as well. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of just communications is don't overcomplicate the message, because financial aid is already a complicated topic. There's no need to get into the weeds on talking about verification or special circumstances, some of the language and jargon associated with financial aid. Don't throw that out there in the universe if you don't have to. It's more of a unique, personalized situation that some students encounter and have to complete additional forms for. So don't overcomplicate your messaging. Just keep it, keep it simple, but make sure that the key thing though is making sure that you're communicating on a regular basis.
Yeah, you think like any relationship that we're trying to build, it's like the key tips here are the first one, don't ghost anybody. Be active in your communication. It sounds like emails and texts are great avenues for that. I know we've even seen some client partners leverage digital ads to very targeted lists just to make sure that their prospective students or students that have been admitted but not yet deposited, we can target that list specifically to just send them a note that's like, we're still working through this, expect information soon, or we'll keep checking in, whatever it might be. So active communication, don't hold back just because you don't have the final answers from just even reaching out to connect with these students and families. But alongside that, I should say, and coexisting with that, let's not make any promises. If you don't know, it's almost a better answer to do the I don't know, let's find out together sort of positioning than it is to commit or promise, especially when we're talking about something as critical as a financial aid and the monetary components of college and universities. And then it also sounds like, Brandi, like that, just like be clear, be kind, like that sort of tone and posture coming from, knowing that everyone is in a high stress situation, especially as weeks and weeks go on, as we get closer to summer. It's, that sort of positioning and posture for just empathy for what everyone is going through on both sides of those conversations is probably key. But I could not agree with you more. If there's one thing that I would actively advise colleges and universities don't do is to just go dark about it. And we've got to be, our students are looking for that connection piece. It's also an opportunity to connect and offer a positive impression of the institution. But we've got to be offering something, even if it is just we're still waiting, we are pending, whatever that language might be. But they've waited too long. Everyone's waited too long at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is key here. Again, just reiterating that if you don't have any new information, that's okay. Just stay in communication, stay in contact.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brandi, I could not thank you enough for just giving us this like deep dive background into how we got here with all of this FAFSA conversation, as we're seeing more and more articles, I feel like, come up every day about its impact. It's so helpful to get your professional expertise as to where this started, why it started, to how it evolved, and to then kind of what we're facing and maybe how we can combat it moving forward. Before we let you go, I'd love to just kind of end on a kind of newer tradition for us on the Rock and Roll podcast, which is just a few rapid fire questions for you, whether that's
Sure.
about higher ed, outside of higher ed. Just would love to get some of your quick answers here if you don't mind.
Of course.
Yeah,
Sounds
let's start
fun.
with if you could give one piece of advice to college admissions directors, what would it be? If you could tell them one thing that you wanted to make sure they heard, what would it be?
Yeah, if it was related to the FAFSA piece, I think it's just stay positive, stay optimistic, because your team, your staff looks up to you, and they can feed off of that energy, especially in a time that's a little bit more difficult now. So I think staying positive and optimistic will really go a long way in maintaining that same energy with your team.
Yeah, good. It's infectious. Either
It
way,
is. It really
positive
is.
or negative, it's infectious. So absolutely. I'm curious to, both, I always appreciate conversations or times we get to partner together because you have this incredible higher ed background and experience. I came from outside higher ed and kind of have gotten to know this industry over the last 5 or 6 years, and its many nuances and how niche it really is. I'm curious, as you have just stayed so in tune with this audience or outside partners or outside examples. Any good recent higher ed or outside higher ed examples of brands and institutions really connecting well or communicating well to their audience that comes to mind?
Yeah, for me, and it may not seem too out of the ordinary, but working with a lot of institutions over the years, and especially here at Vision Point, I've probably spoken with over 100 or more institutions in the last several years, but really focusing on the parent audience as we think about the decline in the traditional age audience and just less, high schoolers out there to pick from. Making sure that you're establishing those relationships with parents and bringing them into the conversation. That means marketing, that means communications on a regular basis with them, and thinking about how you can leverage your system. So, right, I work heavily in a lot of CRM tools, and how you can establish that parent relationship record and connect it to a student record is one area where a lot of schools have really struggled with in being able to effectively communicate with parents. And that's one audience I would say that we've seen a lot of success recently with in terms of just keeping them looped into the conversation, just knowing that they're just a key decision maker, part of the process as well. So go
Yeah.
parents.
Absolutely. And on Mother's Day weekend of all of that. But
Yes,
yeah,
there you go.
no, I could not agree more. I do think, when we're even thinking of media budget allocation or CRM resource allocation, institutions that connect with not just the prospective student audience, but their parents or other members of their households, influencers, and key guardians, it just makes all the difference, especially around a topic that will be so interconnected between what a student wants and what a parent can do or wants for their child or their student, like financial aid or the financial commitment of colleges and universities or higher education as a whole. So yes, love that advice, and absolutely second leveraging your systems to build some of that in so that it is inherent and responsive and personalized where we can.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Last one, just a fun one for you. Just any good podcast or book recommendation you want to offer our listeners?
Yeah, not really higher ed specific, but the last couple of years I've been exploring the realm of astrophysics and earth science and the cosmology. And so there's been a book that I read about a year and a half ago that's kind of took me on my journey in this area called The Last Days of the Dinosaurs by Riley Black. And
Okay.
it's a fantastic book. Kind of it's not just about dinosaurs, because I've never really had like a strong fascination about dinosaurs by any means, but just thinking about where they fit into the ecosystem and the evolution of just Earth and up until now, and what that journey has looked like and how it really shaped where we are right now as humans on this planet, just has fascinated me. And so I highly recommend that if you ever want to dive into that world.
Cool. I love that you said it's not higher ed related, but then it is such like
Sure,
an
yeah.
incredible topic. You're like, it's just astrophysics, please.
Yeah,
Like,
it's just astro.
so amazing. No, I mean, I always love learning something new. That's one of the beauties of, there's, as we were saying earlier, there's many things you could talk about and think about for 40 plus hours a week to be thinking about education and learning. That's always the best part, is in getting to learn something new. So
Yeah.
Brandi, thank you so much. And for all of our listeners, thanks for tuning into this episode of Rock and Roll, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thanks for having me. Bye.